Hey, everybody, welcome back to Deviant Off Script. We hope you're enjoying these Friday episodes. We have a really interesting conversation today with a gentleman by the name of Jacob Moon. If you are familiar with our show around here, you know that we talk to a lot of people who work in corrections and in various parts of the American jail and prison incarceration universe. And Jacob Moon is one of those. But there's a wrinkle here because Jacob is also a true crime writer. Following his time as a corrections officer and working in jails and prisons, he put pen to paper and he started writing. And he's written 3 novels, true crime novels. And it's an interesting conversation to hear how his experience in one led to his experience in the other. So without further ado, here is this week's Deviant Off Script, my conversation with Jacob Moon. Jacob Moon, you're a writer, you're a former corrections officer, you are a former U.S. Army, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
So you've kind of dabbled in a lot of different things. I want to start with your work in law enforcement and in sort of in corrections, if we can start there, because before we get to the writing, I kind of want to understand who you are, what you were then, and how you got into working in corrections. So kind of take me back to when that sort of period in your life started.
Yeah. So we're going to go back in time to a 22-year-old kid who just got out of the Army and was going through a divorce. You know, I had a 1-year-old, 1.5-year-old son, and didn't really know where I was going to be going in life. And I just got into the job by accident, actually. Just was getting a ride from someone, saw a job application on the floorboard with a big star on the front. And I said, hey, what's this? And, you know, there we went.
So what was the first foray into corrections? How does that start?
So you go through a pretty rigorous application process. So whether you want to be a street cop or work in corrections itself, you know, behind bars, literally, you'll go through about I want to say it was a 4 or 5 month application process with just tests. You go through a polygraph, a psych exam. You feel like you're being interrogated by the CIA, kind of.
Yeah.
And once you get hired, then you go through now they have an FTO process, field training, where will be taken around the jail, the different areas, and, you know, on the job training with a dedicated trainer to kind of what you're doing. But back then when I started, there was no such thing. You literally were handed a radio, a pair of handcuffs, and some keys, and were pretty much told good luck.
You know, I know that you obviously have a background in the military, so like sort of that structured universe of rules and routine and discipline and, you know, structure. That's not new to you, right? When you start working in this world?
Yeah, no, it wasn't new at all. And that's actually in large part what attracted me to it in the first place, you know, because I missed that. You know, you get out of the military and you get back in the civilian sector and everyone moves a step slower. People aren't as disciplined. You don't have that rigid discipline, so to speak, that's expected of you. So, yeah, you're exactly right. That's one of the main attractors, and the fact that I was making a little more money and had a pension.
Yeah. Yeah, the pension's key.
Serious, yeah. I'm living it now.
So what state, where were you doing this? Was this in Florida?
This is in Florida, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
That's all right. I was just going to say, so I want to talk a little bit about sort of the dynamic between the correction side and the inmates and the folks that are in. And I've had a lot of conversations with people who have worked in this universe, and it's always kind of fascinating to get an understanding of how that works. Of like, I mean, you're around these people every single day, right? And like, it would seem to me, some level of, you know, you have to coexist with these people. Talk to me a little bit about learning how to coexist with dangerous offenders and sort of understanding their universe, making sure they understand your universe and how things are going to operate.
On your first day and your subsequent days working behind bars, you got to check your attitude and your ego at the door. And it's important, not important, but it's really required to have, a personality to where, okay, yes, I'm in charge of this person. They're care, custody, and control. I control their world. They can't leave. But there's a dichotomy involved, and you have to understand and respect the fact that although they can't leave, your safety for the most part is going to depend on them
Yeah.
because you are behind bars. And let's say you're in a pod with 80 inmates and you're locked in there with them. They could kill you or take you hostage at any second. It's really just up to them. So it would behoove you not to have, how can we say, have an adverse attitude of, I'm in charge. I'm going to disrespect you. I'm going to, not treat you like a man or a woman and not give you the things that you really need to have. Now, I'm not going to take disrespect, but I'm also not going to give it unless someone is just kind of forced me.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point you make about, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but like the idea that even though the corrections officers and the warden and the sort of the infrastructure is the infrastructure, to some degree, there is still an element of control that a group of inmates can wield.
They can, to a certain point. Now,
Yeah.
you also know, yes, they could technically take us hostage, but they also know that they're not getting out. So,
Right.
classic example would be in a hostage situation. And I worked in a county jail, which wasn't much different than a prison. They are a little different, but for the most part, this is the same. They know they're not getting out. So, no matter what they do, they could take the major hostage, they could take the sergeant, lieutenant, myself. I ended my career as a sergeant. So you lose all rank the second that you get taken hostage. And they say, well, listen, we're going to kill Jake right here. We got a shank to his neck. And if you don't let me out, they're going to say, well, we really don't want you to do that. But if you do, you're going to get prosecuted and you're not going past the housing unit doors, let alone down the hallway, let alone out the front door.
It's a tough spot to be in, obviously, to sort of navigate all of that. Did you like the job? Was there parts of that job that you found fulfilling? Or was it just sort of a job that you're like, no, it's a job I do. It's a thing I got to do. And that's sort of it. I'm always kind of curious if there's some fulfillment in a job like that.
That's a really good question. And I'll answer it as honestly as I can. I loved parts of the job and I hated parts of the job. And that's probably not unique to a lot of different people's careers. But what I loved the most about it was that level of discipline. I'm used to wearing a uniform. I've got equipment. There's a common team type atmosphere with your coworkers of us against them, for lack of a better term. You've got training using weapons. I'm not a huge weapons guy, but obviously I did use them in the military and at the sheriff's office. Important point, no one carries a gun inside a jail or prison. So there's that to contend with. You don't want to be easily disarmed and all that, but
Is that a departmental, like based on the department, or is that sort of a general standing rule?
that's a standing rule for every jail and prison in the entire country that I'm aware
Okay.
of. Now that you've got
I guess I'd never realized that. I mean, it makes sense, but I don't think I'd ever realized that.
yeah, there's certainly armed posts outside of the secure areas,
Sure.
rec yards, perimeter, hospital duty, the expected places, but inside the actual housing units, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, just to go on with that. Yeah, I loved working with in that team kind of atmosphere. It's the squad mentality, and I didn't like the smells. I didn't like the noise. Didn't like just the stress of dealing with. I worked with psychiatric inmates for the vast majority of my career, and that's how I survived 28 years without not losing my mind too. Is so sometimes wonder how that happened, but
Yeah. God, the psychiatric unit, I mean, on one hand, I can imagine. On the other hand, I can't imagine what you were kind of dealing with on a daily basis. Was there a moment, and this is something I always like to ask people that worked in this universe, was there a moment or an instance when you thought, you know, whether it was a skirmish or some sort of unrest or something, where the control was lost, and there might have been, that you look back and you think that could have gone sideways if we hadn't done something, you know, differently?
Yeah, there's probably a thousand of those instances. I remember I was on the tactical team for a number of years, and that's your classic CERT team where you get, you know, dressed up in the Ninja Turtles, whatever. That was our nickname. And
Yeah.
and
I know exactly what you're talking about too. It's funny.
right. And so we go to this situation where this inmate's barricaded himself inside a cell. He's refusing to relocate. He's got water and soap on the cell, so when we go in there, we're slipping all over the place. And so we decide to leave. Someone should have stayed there at the cell. We knew that, but we kind of got distracted. Anyway, we come back, and now he's tied wet bed sheets around the gate. So now we can't even open the door without getting close. Every time we get close, he's got a shank and he's trying to stab us. So that's one of those kind of like, oh shit moments where you're just, you know, your eyes get big and you just realize, especially if you're the team leader in that situation, like, wow, okay, what am I going to do? And, you know, we handled it. We actually had to throw chemicals in the cell and all that, but it was a big cluster. And that clusters, that was like the name of the game there. It's just, they happen all the time, every day. There was a lot of routine, but you always knew there was something unexpected and new that was right around the corner, no matter how long you worked there.
There's a new book by author Carl Barney that's actually made a big difference in my life. It's about something we all strive for: happiness. You weren't born to coast through life. You were born to feel alive, to wake up with energy, to live a life that excites you. The new book, The Happiness Experiment, is the tool to help you do just that. It's not fluff. It's a practical system to help you find your unique version of joy, meaning, and drive. It's time to stop surviving and start thriving. If you want to learn more, take a few minutes at the end of this podcast and listen to an interview I did with Carl about the happiness experiment and how you can bring it to life for you. Discover your unique happiness type by taking the free assessment at myhappinesstype.com. Then grab your copy of the happiness experiment at booksamillion.com. That's BOOKSAMILLION.com, booksamillion.com.
Can you talk to me a little bit about, you know, you mentioned earlier that you worked in a jail. And I think that sometimes there's a misconception that a jail is not nearly as dangerous or, you know, not as dicey as, say, a supermax or, you know, a prison, like a state prison or a federal prison. I only know just from my conversations with people that is not the case. I think a lot of people might assume that the jail is just like the drunk tank, people with DUIs and, you know, people that didn't pay their child support. Obviously, you know, that is not the case. Talk to me a little bit about the danger that obviously exists in a sheriff's jail, just like a prison.
Yeah, there's definitely a distinction there. From the people you talk to, it really depends on the type of jail or prison that they worked in. In Florida, for instance, there's 67 counties in Florida. The county I worked in, I believe, was the third or fourth largest county jail in the state, after Orange County, Miami-Dade, you know, like the huge ones. But still, you know, the county I was in was like a 1 million plus population, and the county jail held just over 3,000. So it was much even larger than the Florida state prisons. So another thing people don't really realize is everyone that winds up in prison started in the jail.
Right. Yeah.
So that's where that whole thing comes from the point of arrest on the street, get transported to the jail. And yeah, To your point, absolutely. It was a drunk tank. It was a psych ward. It was 100 different things. But it was also, if, we had civilian tours that come around and they were just amazed that it looks like a prison. It looks like a lot of different things. It kind of depends on where you are. Small county might have 20 jail cells, because they've got, 500 people in the town. And then you got big counties like ours that had thousands.
Yeah. What was the biggest challenge for you in that time in corrections? I mean, obviously every day was a challenge to some degree, right? But like throughout the course of your time there, what was the biggest challenge that you dealt with, doing that job?
It was balancing the stress of dealing with the inmates and also having to abide by state, federal policies, our own administration that evolved over time. Because you've got, here you are in the middle, you're working the floors and you've got eyes on you from below, eyes on you from above. You're working shift work. So, a 12-hour shift, and I worked nights the last 15 plus years of my career. So it's, it gets very stressful. You already know what you're dealing with at work. And then you're dealing with kid issues, relationship issues, just life in general, the stuff everyone deals with. But then on top of that, you got to go to work and deal with people that are cussing you out and throwing piss at you, literally. And then you got to turn around and protect their rights. You can't just roll in there with fists and sticks. And that's by and large a misconception. It does happen from time to time, but you got to show restraint to people who have absolutely no respect for you, who mean you physical harm, and are just being criminals. And
yeah. We talk a lot on this show about sort of, well, not sort of, but we talk a lot about people that do awful things and the bad behavior and sort of being, on the fringe of what we all kind of accept as society's norms, right? And there's plenty of those people in jails and in prisons. I'm curious from your standpoint, did you run into people or did you have experiences with people who were in jail and surrounded by these people who maybe were the other side of, maybe had done something that wasn't necessarily indicative of who they were as a person or someone that, did you have experiences with people where you saw them, kind of more than just what they were behind bars? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And it's, I'm glad you brought that up because it's that career brings with it, like an assumption of guilt a lot of times. Like, okay, if you're in jail, you did something wrong. I knew that wasn't the case. I think pretty much everyone that worked there, everyone in the admin pretty much knew it wasn't our job to be judge and jury. But with that being said, there were many times there were people, inmates, who I interacted with who, let's say they were in there for a domestic. And you've got your typical someone in there that's always beating on the wife or is like their fifth domestic. So you pretty much can tell. It's like, okay, once could be an accident, 5 times ain't no accident. But that being said, I've been in situations, domestic situations, where it was this close to, if the cops had been called, and actually that did happen a couple times where, who knows, I could have gone to jail. And by the grace of God or some other being looking down on me, like I knew I wasn't at fault, but a lot of times a police officer that's on the scene, they've got to make a snap judgment. And even if the other person doesn't have bruises on them or what have you, anyone can wind up in jail. I had coworkers that who I knew got arrested and came into our own jail. And
Really?
oh, absolutely. Over a dozen for a variety of things. But, as far as inmates, there's one story I can tell real quick. There was a young,
Take your time.
yeah, there was a young kid. I was early in my career, probably 2 or 3 years in. So I'm in my early 20s. He might be 19 or 20. Young black kid like me. I could have been him. He could have been me if a couple different things had just gone differently. So anyway, he's in for statutory rape. Basically, he was like 19 and his girlfriend was 17. So not really rape per se, but statutorily in Florida, if there's a complaint and if for some reason the police officer decides to arrest you for it and we'll let the courts work it out. Well, that's what happened. His girlfriend was white. From what he said, the dad wasn't with it. Was upset the fact that his daughter was dating someone of color. So supposedly he gets the daughter to flip and whatever. Anyway, he goes to jail. He's in one of the psych areas. He wasn't really psych, but they were kind of worried that he was going to maybe hurt himself. So I talked to this kid for months. He'd been to school, very articulate, smart kid, personable, and is the only thing he'd ever been arrested for. So long story short, his trial date's coming up and he's getting real nervous. And he's talking to me about it. He goes, yeah, Officer Moon, it's like, I just really feel like it's not going to go well for me. I'm like, look, just let it run its course. And, if it doesn't work out for you, you can appeal, blah, blah, blah. So someone had let him out of his cell. And these were all single cell lockdown cells. So there's an officer in that area with them when they're having phone and shower time and whatnot. Well, the officer decided to leave. He never told anyone that he was leaving. So about 5 minutes later, now I worked the floor and I didn't know that he had left. I hear the inmates start screaming and trying to get our attention from in there. So there's a bank of windows that looks into the pod, and I looked in there and I was like, what's going on? And I looked down and like I froze for a second because I see the inmate hanging. So I unfreeze a split second later. Me and my partner run in there. No idea how long he's been hanging. Pull him up, cut him down with our emergency tools, CPR. We call a code. The nurses come. He's not responding. The paramedics come. He actually did survive. He was about an inch from death. He had this huge indentation in his neck from the rope. He'd used the rope from a laundry bag.
Yeah.
He comes back from the hospital, and a week later he goes to trial, and guess what happens? He gets acquitted.
Yeah.
So I remember he's just like, I never saw him again, because if you go to court, whether it's for shoplifting or murder, you get acquitted, you walk out of the courtroom a free person.
Right. Yeah.
You don't come back to the jail. So I never saw him. I was like, wow, okay. I couldn't believe it. And a couple months later, I'm walking through the mall, and who do I see? It's him. He comes up to me, and he got a new job. He's got a new girlfriend. And he shook my hand. He goes, Officer Moon, I really want to thank you for, being decent to me. You gave me hope, but I just really thought that my life was over, and you helped save my life. I really appreciate it. And that made me feel really good, because it actually helped someone in a place that there's not a lot of chance to help people. And I'll never forget, I saw on his neck, he still had that huge scar on his neck from the way home.
Yeah. I would imagine there's not a lot of opportunity for help in a place like that. And you got to take those victories, right? You got to take those wins. That's a pretty big thing to have. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your writing. You're also a crime author, and I'd love to sort of know when the transition from working in corrections to writing happened. I don't think you don't often see somebody who goes from one to the other. So just kind of walk me through when sort of the germination of that all came about.
Yeah, well, for me, it was a pretty easy transition because I was always a writer before I got the job. I'd been writing since I was probably 12, 13 years old. Short stories. I was sending them off to magazines back when you have to send them in an envelope and they'd send it back to you in an envelope,
Yeah.
self-addressed
Yeah.
stamp. And rejections piled up. I wasn't getting published, but I never quit. And then I was still writing when I was in the Army. Graduated to a word processor. And then with my job at the sheriff's office. And I went through a spell, maybe about 10 or so years where I really wasn't writing that much. I was getting much more into music. I was playing guitar, and I thought that maybe I'd maybe start playing gigs or going to a band maybe someday. And then I decided I just want to like just sit in the backyard and play with friends and family.
Yeah.
And I picked the writing back
Yeah.
up, and it was a natural progression because my first book I knew was going to be about a jailbreak.
Yeah, the subject matter is quite plentiful, I imagine. Talk to me a little bit about, going from a job that is so rigid and discipline oriented to doing something that is so creative and is like an outlet, right? Did you think there's a link between those two, or there was a link between those two for you where one meant the other one was even more necessary for you?
They're both kind of necessary, I think, because to last in a job like that and to be in that kind of environment, you almost have to be able to escape within your own mind sometimes, if that makes any sense. And it requires patience dealing with the inmate population. Being a writer, when you're sitting there writing for hours on end, like the other night I was up till 4 a.m., writing. It's me and the computer, and there's no one else. Yeah, they really do play upon each other. So I think I owe a little bit of each success to the other discipline.
Did you know that you wanted to write about, sort of crime, mystery, suspense, or did a lot of that come from just doing the job that you did? Was it a natural progression?
Yeah, I grew up loving horror, actually.
Yeah.
Twilight Zone, amazing stories. I love Stephen King. Anything with, I love mystery. Agatha Christie, just the classics. So
Yeah.
there was a part of me that just really loved that aspect. Like I was a mini detective. Something happened in the house when we were growing up, whatever. I always wanted to like look into it and see what, why that was or whatever. So I think my job in the military made sense, how I transitioned to the sheriff's office and what I did there, and then how I transitioned to writing the things I write, things that are, I think, deeply psychological, and not just writing about someone breaking out of prison or a spirit that appears in my second book or about a serial killer that appears in my third book, but more so the stories behind them, because everyone's got a story and bad things can happen sometimes, but there's always a reason. It doesn't mean there's by no means it absolves the bad things from happening, but there really are reasons. So I just have always liked to explore that, and through the writing, I find I have that freedom to do that, where you're constrained working for a law enforcement agency by laws, policy books that are like a foot thick. I mean, you gotta like, you gotta watch yourself all the time. But as a writer, you don't. There are no rules. I mean, there's conventions that you should follow, and if you want to be successful and write a convincing story that people are gonna like, yes, you have to abide by certain rules per se. But other than that, it's like, hey, if I want to write about a ghost today, if I want to write about a serial killer tomorrow, if I want to write about a cop, about a single mom, I can do it. So that's cool.
Yeah, it's funny. Our team, when we're writing our scripts for our shows, which is obviously all kind of rooted in nonfiction and in real kind of documentary style, accuracy is obviously always kind of our number one thing. And I've said to the other guys on our team many times, like, man, fiction would be so much easier if we could just make it up. I mean, we don't have to like verify this one little piece of information. We can just make it whatever we want.
True.
But so I'd like to ask you a little bit about that. You know, your latest book, Letter 26, is about a serial killer. Take me through sort of the process of writing a book about a serial killer. Like, what's the process? Is it a composite of other real life stories that you've read? Was it, I'm just going to completely start with a blank slate and build this thing out on my own without any kind of outside noise? Just walk me through the process of writing a book about a serial killer and their crimes.
Well, with that book in particular, I was helped by the fact that it was originally a short story that I wrote.
Yeah.
So, but even all short stories, you know, just have to be born and, you know, fleshed out, no pun intended. But I'm trying to think of like that particular character. You know, he was really interesting and fun to write for a lot of reasons. So much for the despicable things that he was doing, but just, you know, how he grew up. And that was the most fascinating part of the book, actually, of rewinding. There are flashback scenes of him growing up as a boy and his experiences with his family and how he was treated in certain ways. And not to give too much away, but there were terrible things that did happen to him, namely like physical, psychological abuse. And it was always my desire to show to the reader and have the reader experience like, okay, you know, I can see, I'm not going to ever forgive what he was doing because he's doing some horrible shit, but I can understand, like, could I have ended up like this? Or someone I knew who was dealing with some very, very severe abuse. And it goes to show that there are other characters in the book who also went through traumatic childhoods who did not end up like that. One became a cop and the other became a victim.
No, you know, you raise an interesting point because this is something that we've talked about, our team has talked about a lot. And part of that, the point that I'm trying to make is that people are drawn to true crime for a million different reasons. Some people want sort of the gory details. That's not necessarily my thing. Some people like the mystery of who did this. What's the answer to the riddle, as it were. I think one of the primary motivators, though, for a lot of people that consume true crime or fictional crime, obviously, is that they transport themselves into the story. And they think, if that was me, how would I handle it? Like, there's sort of a relatability of, you know, a regular person going through an incredibly traumatic, irregular experience. And it sounds like what you're saying, that's sort of what you wanted the reader to get from your character.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that as a writer, to me, that's the whole point.
Yeah.
Is you ideally, I would think, writing fiction, and really to that point, even nonfiction, really want to immerse that reader in whatever world that, you know, you're trying to create. So the setting, the character's mind, scene by scene, you know, instead of looking at it as an outside observer, you know, we do that with movies. We, you know, like a really good filmmaker or a really good playwright will arrange their dialogue and the tension and all the conflict that's in there for that 2 hours or 3 hours or 8 to 10 hours if you're reading a book that, you know, as soon as you open it, as soon as you turn the TV on, you're there. And like work and family and all the craziness, whatever, for that time, it's secondary and you're there. So to be able to do that, not everyone's gonna like my stories, but that's fine. But for the people who do, it's really, really rewarding to be able to do that. And I've always wanted to do it, and I feel blessed to, after a long time, finally being able to.
As we wrap up here, I'm going to tell people that they can go to your website, which is writerjake.com, correct?
Yes.
And they can buy one of your books there. You've got 3 novels, Letter 26. Actually, I'll let you tell the audience what your books are and where they can go find them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So go ahead and make the sale, Jacob Moon.
All right, yes, and writerjake.com. You can find my three novels. Furlough, it's about a jailbreak. Dead Reckoning, it's about a supernatural kind of dual timeline kind of detective story. And then Letter 26 is a horror / police procedural. And on that website, I've got the first 3 chapters in text that people can read and check out. And also all 3 are on audio, and I've got audio samples. I think it's the first chapter or 2 of all 3 books.
Well, Jake, I will make you a deal in that we will have you come back after the memoir is done, because that sounds like it is right up my alley. I really, really want to thank you for your time. We really appreciate. It's not often we talk to somebody who's sort of worked behind bars and in the the American jail prison industrial complex, and is also writing novels. So it's a great combo. It was a good time having you here.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I really appreciate it.